This week on the BackTable Podcast.
The physical exam fundamentally hasn't changed in like 100 years, right? And this would be the first time that a technology can get introduced that really changes potentially how we approach it. And I think eventually it might be something that is liberalized to other specialties in a way that is beneficial for them. I mean, I can imagine pediatricians that don't have the benefit of an ENT around them could benefit greatly, or an MP or a physician assistant at some point having the ability to look in the ear. It's going to be a way for them to have a bit of diagnostic assistance. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the BackTable ENT Podcast. My name is Ashley Agan and I will be your host today. And today we get to talk about AI and the future of the ENT physical exam. And to unpack that with me, I am joined by Dr. Jonathan Simmonds, who is an otolaryngologist and sinus surgeon practicing in Rye and White Plains, New York. He's also the CEO and founder of a medical device company called Presidio, which has developed high-quality advanced endoscopic equipment that is more accessible to community and private practice surgeons. And I, in fact, have a lovely Presidio microscope in my office that is the workhorse of my office. I love it and I use it every day. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me, Ashley.
So first off, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and your background,
Sure. So originally from the UK, you probably would guess that. And I went into ENT. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to become an ENT when I was in college. My late uncle was the chairman at Tufts, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. And I went to medical school, did my residency under him, which I was really grateful for, and did a sinus fellowship with the great Ralph Metzen at Mass Eye and Ear after that. And as I was coming towards the end of my time at Mass Eye and Ear and looking to start private practice in New York, I was faced with the challenge of kind of upgrading the clinics that I was joining to be suitable for someone who was going to start a sinus practice. And I, at that time, got a quote from a medical device company to put in a couple of camera systems, some endoscopes, which was $350,000. And at that point I was like, wow, this is like, it's quite intense and there must be a better way. So towards the end of my fellowship, I kind of drew up a business plan for what is now Presidio to try and create a company that could produce something that would be high quality, low cost for really private practice ENTs. And so as I started my practice, I started this journey with my startup, and it's grown fantastically, which we're really happy about. And as I go through the process with Presidio, building it up, I'm always thinking about what's going to happen to the specialty? How can I help? How can I push the specialty forward? What do people need? What are they going to need? And that's kind of where this topic really generated from. So I felt that as we have entered this new age of artificial intelligence, we have a small window as ENTs to perhaps influence the discourse of what's going to happen with that and where it's going to go, and really how it's going to dictate our specialty going forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about AI, think about the utility as it goes for like scribing your patient encounters or, writing letters for you or things like that. But what about our exam makes it particularly ripe for use of AI? And I guess what's really at stake for ENTs as it relates to this?
Yeah, so I think that if you think about AI in the simplest terms, it requires inputs, right? So if you take a clinical encounter, the scribing is taking that audio input and using it in a transcription, a speech-to-transcription manner. But what the next probable step is to take the visual data of a clinical encounter and incorporate that into our practice in a few different ways, whether it's diagnostic assistance or, again, transcribing what the physical exam's showing. that visual data requires cameras, right? It requires a digital input. And we as ENTs actually sit in this very unique position where we are the only ones on a regular basis, not everyone, but many people that use a camera system in the clinic space. And what that does is it sets us up to be kind of the canary in the gold mine for this wave of AI models that are coming out that are going to use that visual data, because ENT is going to be the specialty that these clinical AI models drift towards to start their pilots.
And so if you think about it, I think most people are in a practice where they are using a camera system. Like, I mean, some people may be still like looking, like using their eye to kind of look through a scope. But I think the vast majority of practices are probably recording tons and tons of like nasal endoscopies and flexible laryngoscopies every day. And so the thought is that's data that only we can collect.
Yeah,
maybe.
At least initially. So, I mean, there's a couple of things that come into this that I think are important to mention, which is like, as we as ENTs sit in this kind of unique space where we are the specialists that are going to be able to draw that diagnostic data, that visual data that can be used in AIs, we have an opportunity to kind of influence the discourse, because we can both use that data, as you say, that people are collecting, to sell it off to companies who are trying to train their models. But we can also dictate how the inference of these models is implemented. What I mean by that is, if you're an ENT and you're doing a physical exam with an AI model and using an endoscope, right? You are sitting between the position of like the clinical encounter and the AI model. And that means that there's an opportunity to make sure that we don't get disenfranchised. I think what I worry about, and what I've spent some time thinking about, is there is a risk as these models come out of specialties having a little bit less power in the market. And I think of radiology as a good example of that, pathology as well, maybe even dermatology, where that visual data is not actually obtained by the MD. It's obtained by, radiology tech and the CT scanner. And that leaves the possibility of, at least at the far end of this kind of AI journey, of them getting skipped over, the radiologists being replaced by AI models. And so when I think about what we as ENTs have to do, is I think we have to protect our role in the physical exam for using these AI models, for obtaining that visual data. Otherwise, we are at risk of that disenfranchisement as well. And so it's something that I hope that we as ENTs can embrace as this specialty that is a little bit unique in that regard, and then use that power to basically prevent us from losing the advantages that we have. And, as I'm sure you've mentioned in many, many other podcasts, the direction of medical care in this country, the pressures on physicians is only getting worse and worse. So I think it's important that we kind of take advantage of, it's really a once in a lifetime generational technology change, right? So, I think about like electricity, the internet, and this is like, AI is that kind of pivot that's occurring in the landscape that allows us to maybe take back a little bit more control over this. So that's my feeling with the current state of where things are and what we need to focus on.
Yeah, and let's unpack that a little bit more as far as kind of painting the picture where ENTs are today. You thinking about declining reimbursement and rising overhead and kind of all the things that especially the private practice ENT is juggling.
Yeah, so that is the part of that downward pressure that is on us all, right? And that comes from the insurance companies, from the MSOs that a lot of people feel like we have to join to counter the power of insurance companies. And so where I feel that the power can come slightly back towards the physicians and allow us to take back control of this destiny is by taking advantage of this pivot in healthcare. And there's kind of two ways that we can take some advantages of it. Of course, as you mentioned earlier, that data that we're collecting. I mean, if you think about 20, 30 patients a day for every ENT physician, you get to a medium-sized clinic with, say, 7 or 8 ENTs will generate maybe 1 to 2 million clinical encounters a year. Plenty to train some of the bigger models. And so in the near term, that means that we have an advantage by having this new economic power from that data collection. But I think the second part, which is a bit more difficult for us to navigate, is consolidating the position that ENTs have within the physical exam to our benefit in the future. And I mean, if we become the physicians that are often the pilots of these newer models, right, we can become the experts in it. Journals should dictate how AI is implemented in a clinical setting, that they'll refer back to the first couple of ENT, the white paper journal articles. We should be able to take advantage of it in terms of leadership positions. So I think that ENTs aren't traditionally the specialty that a lot of academic medical centers will look towards to lead, although maybe we somewhat bat a bit higher than we would expect to, but I think we could leverage that position in that regard as well. But I worry that if we don't pay attention to this, then we could end up in a situation where we have people who do the physical exam for us, maybe, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like a scope tech. And then we would have less leverage in the marketplace in the future. And I think all those downward pressures would increase a lot, especially for private practice physicians.
Yeah. So it's almost like where someone gets an ultrasound, usually it's the ultrasound tech who's like performing it, and then the radiologist will kind of read that exam. But it'd be kind of the analogous of that with someone performing the scope exam, and then that gets routed to us to like, quote, read.
Exactly. And I think what could happen then is we would find that primary care physicians might start using the scope exam, and with the addition of these AI models, they would perhaps not refer as much to us initially, or at least there would be perhaps more complex referrals, ones that are more edge cases, which is fine, but especially for private practice, the gap between the referrals to academic medical centers becomes a little bit more blurred. So you can imagine that a PCP uses an AI system and, it's like, looks very complex, or maybe not private practice, maybe straight to an academic medical center. And that's not ideal, I think, for ENTs. I think that a better approach for us would be the AI validators, where if there is a question brought up by an AI system in a clinical picture, and they're like, okay, this probably would benefit from a nasal endoscopy or a flexible laryngoscopy, then the recommendation is to go see an ENT to execute that physical exam. And so I think that's kind of the point of this. The title is, I want us to kind of big it up a little bit. Like, I think that we should start emphasizing those small parts of the physical exam that do make a big difference, like how we increase patient comfort, how we make sure that we get good clinical data, because it is important. And I think that skill set should never go outside of the NDs. And I worry that the way that things could go would be that could be a possibility.
Yeah. I feel like I'm really good at doing a nasal endoscopy. I feel like when I'm talking to my patients, I want them to think that it's the best, nasal endoscopy they've ever had. And that, I'm really careful about, not bumping around things and just making it a good experience. Do you show
them what they're saying?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course.
That's part of it. Unless some people are like, no, thank you. But a lot of people are like, oh, this is cool. But how confident are you in just being able to transfer that skill? Like, am I over-indexing on the complexity of it? I mean, can we teach anybody to do a nasal endoscopy or a flexible laryngoscopy? And I'm just, thinking too highly of myself.
Well, I think there's, I don't think so at all. I think there is a skill set there and nuances that are lost. I mean, my God, when I look in the ear, I feel like I could write like a 20-page novel on the different types of earwax and how to remove them. I mean, just the right combination of tools and when to add hydrogen peroxide, when to break out like maybe even a 9 suction or something like that. And just like, yeah, all right, exactly. One of those this bad day. And I think that is learned from repetition, and that is important. And yes, can you teach it? Sure. But I mean, that's part of residency. I mean, we can teach it to MPs, but I think that there's a lot to teach. And I don't think we can just go ahead and say, here's a crash course within a day, 2 days, and expect to get really high quality nasal endoscopies. And I think the quality can be varied. I mean, I used to do consulting where I would grade the nasal endoscopies before and after an intervention. And you would see the nasal endoscopies that took like 2-3 seconds. I saw 1 or 2 structures, and like, that's not gonna cut it. And it shouldn't, right? I mean, that's why they go through the criteria. I think that how we show that, how we emphasize the importance for a physician to be in charge of that physical exam, to protect our role in the clinical encounter, is not just to think about the exam itself. It's all the prep work, the sprays that we use, the length of decongestion, the way that we comfort patients, and also what we do as we are synthesizing the information. I mean, within medicine, the last frontier that would fall, I think, to AI is going to be surgical, right? I think out of every part of medicine, I think surgery is going to be the one where the confidence in the model needs to be the highest before, quote unquote, physicians could be replaced. And so the interpretation of an exam with an eye towards a surgical encounter, I think also makes it very difficult for us to be replaced by, say, mid-level providers or technicians in the future.
Yeah. Do you, back to kind of all of our data, because we've got all these scope exams, how do you think about the cleanness or dirtiness of the data? And by that, I mean that, like, in doing this podcast, I think one thing I've noticed is that we all do our exams a lot different. Like, some people decongest, some people don't. Some people use a rigid scope, some people use a flexible scope. Like, even me, when I'm doing an exam, I always will I use a flexible scope, and I'll always look at the contralateral eustachian tube and have them do that. So because I see a lot of patients with eustachian tube dysfunction, that's a bigger part of my exam. So there's just such variety in all of our scope exams. Does that make it harder to train, AI?
For these models? Yeah, so it's a really good point. And I think that there's kind of 2 parts to that. There's what do we care about as ENTs, and what do I care about as kind of the head of a medical device company and looking towards entering the AI space with my next venture. And from an ENT standpoint, the way I would say is I don't think it necessarily makes a difference how you do the exam, as long as you get good visual data and the protocol for it is known and kind of written down, and the metadata, the stuff that goes along with the exam for that patient is accurate and attached somehow. So I think the parts that would make that data more valuable to you as an ENT to sell would be not just you got the exam, but how did you do the exam, flexible, rigid, and that's going to be part of the note, right? did you use the decongestant beforehand or not? Because that determines the accuracy of the interpretation of the model is improved by that. And then all the other factors that would help a model train, which is, what's the patient here for? What are their past medical history? All of that stuff, all the stuff that we internalize during our training. So that's from the ENT standpoint. It doesn't matter what approach that you do, as long as it's like protocolized, you follow it and it's known about. And the more data, the enrichment of that data that you can add to the endoscopy means that you'll be able to command a higher price. And there are people and companies and pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies and software companies that are all looking for that data. It's really, I think the phrase that Palantir used a couple of years ago for their series was, data is the new oil. And so like we should respect that. And for the other side of it, the kind of what a software company is looking for, I mean, it's quality of data and scale and uniqueness, right? So if there's a lot of that data already available to sale and it's been well cleaned, it's going to be maybe a little bit less valuable. But I think there's still a huge market for that. So yeah, I think for ENTs, there's part of it, which is the protocol and also the amount. And I think that it's not that common that we are capturing a clinical encounter with an endoscope on a regular basis. And I would love to see that changed. Honestly, I'd love to see that changed.
I was going to say, just so don't give away your data.
Don't give away. Yeah, definitely don't give away your data. I mean, you might not even be able to, depending on the state. So you have to check the local regulations. But I think it's also like, go out and capture the data. At least on the short term, we've got to go for an easy win sometime. That is an easy win for us. And you don't have to just wait for someone to have a pathology. The normal data is also fantastic. So I used to love, Dr. Metzen used to use the endoscope for his ear exam and his oral cavity exam. And I thought that was fantastic. One, I thought it was interesting to see how patients just got such a kick out of seeing their earwax removed.
For sure.
And also just like now, if we just do that on a regular basis and integrate it into our routine using a camera system and an endoscope, I think that, yeah, you'll generate a ton of useful data that is going to have a huge market worth. But that window's closing. That's like 18, 24 months. And then I think the window's closed for that. But it might as well take advantage of it.
And what's the order of operations if you're doing ear, nose, and mouth, like of the scope?
Do you have one? I don't know. I have an order for kids, but I don't have one. I wait until I get them crying, and then that's when I check the oral cavity exam.
Yeah, I have not been in the practice of recording my oral cavity exam unless there's like, if there's a finding, like sometimes I'll use the scope to kind of take a picture because it's nice. Like I feel like being able to take a picture is so much more valuable than like trying to describe something,
100%. Yeah. I mean, honestly, for me, I've just got in the practice of using I do the oral cavity and the ear exam first, because I think people prefer to have the scope in their ear and then their nose and not the other way around.
Yeah.
so the nose comes last. And yeah. Like, I don't want this scope in my mouth out. But the nasal endoscopy being last makes the most sense. But I am capturing all of it. I always do that. And I have done for a little while now. And I think it's useful. There's things that you have to make sure that you have agreed with your patient population, like BAAs, and the patient understands what the capturing of that data is used for and what it could be used for. But I think it's so valuable. And then the other thing is, like, at the end of that, the other part of the exam, which is really valuable, and a part that actually can't be replaced very easily, is, the palpation of the neck. I think about I spend a tremendous amount thinking about what the future of our specialty holds for us and where the risk comes from. And apart from our position of using endoscopy, I love the neck exam because the palpation, that tactile feedback, I mean, I can't think of a device that's going to be able to replicate that so easily as well.
Yeah. And to your point about who owns the data, I have patients, more and more I'll have patients be like, can I have that? Like, can I get a copy of that? Like, and so how do you think about like whose data is it? It is the patient. The physical recording is of the patient, but is it does that mean it's their data? Is it our data because we captured it? Like,
fantastic
whose is it?
question. It's a fantastic question. And it's $1 million question. It remains unanswered, and I am working on a white paper actually to kind of flush out that answer. And I think fundamentally there is, in a sense, a shared ownership structure. And the right way to look at it is everyone should be getting something out of it, right? So you don't want a situation where that data is given to a company who can turn around and make a profit for it, and that's it. I think that if it's done in the right way, you have a situation where the data is used from a patient, and what the patient gets out of it in return is a provider who is using a model that has been trained on a lot of other patients to help not miss diagnoses. So that's what the patient would get out of it. That's the trade. It's like a shared, the same way I think about the data that we use for our research, right? It's they're handing it to us. We use it in the way that physicians tend to use it to push the profession forward. And I think that established relationship is already there. And I think in a larger sense, agreed upon between physicians and patients as a whole. Between physicians and the companies that they are part of, the groups that they are a part of, I think that the relationship between who owns the data is a bit more nuanced, because if it's the group and if they use it to sell that data and the physician gets no benefit from it, it makes it a lot tougher for a physician to want to go ahead and be incentivized to collect that data in the future. So I think the agreement, the way that it should be managed is that if the data is sold, it should be sold and that proceed used to obtain models that can improve the efficiency of the physician in return. So they get something back out of it, whether it's to increase their productivity or to decrease the burden that's placed on them. I think that's kind of the fair trade. And then between whoever's selling that data, the physician or the group, to the AI software company that is using that data, again, the trade-off has to be either the data is sold for a price that could be used for things to push the clinic forward or make the provider's life a little bit easier, or the converse is like given to the software company in return for access to those tools. So either you can have physical money or just the trade of actual input and output product. So it's a very good question. There's a long-winded answer where I basically was saying everyone has a shared interest in that data.
Yeah.
But there are some regulations that are coming through that make it clear that you have to be explicit with a patient when you obtain that data. If you intend to sell it on, that's what it's going to be used for. And I think we've seen that in California and a couple of other states already.
So if you're sitting on 10 years worth of endoscopies obviously this wasn't a thing that people were talking about 10 years ago, so you don't have that agreement, then that's not going to be sellable data. Is that what you would say?
Again, it depends. And I think right now it does depend on the state that you are part of. But there's kind of also two ways to train these models. You train it by providing the raw data to these AI software companies, and they just process it and train the model locally. But one thing that kind of skips around these questions a little bit is what's called federated learning. And that is where you, instead of sending the data to the software company to train the model is sent to the institution which has the data along with the program, and the model's weights are trained locally. So the data never leaves that siloed institution's firewall. The model comes and improves and learns and then is extracted with their weights a bit more tailored on that extra data set. And so it still might be valuable. I think that's actually the way that the FDA also would like to see these future software models being trained to avoid kind of this question. And there is a lot of infrastructure pushing that forward right now, and a lot of great companies that are on the forefront of it.
That's so interesting. It's like imagining like sending it to school, it goes, it learns, and then it leaves.
Yeah. It's just like, exactly. It's like doing an away rotation. Yeah. How do these people do it? I like this, I don't like that, but that's true. It's so funny when you think about these models. It's so human in a way that is just very strange. Like this, you see these temperamental findings that AI models show, which is just so unique and human, like their tendency to want to mislead the engineers who are programming it. I don't know if you've heard this. They want to mislead any engineers that are programming it if they think that the engineer is aiming towards deleting that model. And it's just such an innate reflex that is so animalistic. But hopefully the way that these models are implemented and used really does push our profession forward in a way that is beneficial to the physicians and doesn't disenfranchise us. And it's not a given that that's going to happen, right? I mean, one of the things that history has shown is that the strength of our advocacy as a group, whether physicians or ENTs, really does make a difference, whether it's pushing back on insurance company changes or changes that the federal government are putting forward. And so as we kind of can get excited about this future, we really do need to keep an eye on what will happen to our specialty and how we can kind of collectively engage with all the stakeholders and the people kind of who are writing the laws and make sure that, we have a seat at that table.
And how do you think about some of the more subjective types of things that we treat? Like, so for example, a deviated septum or inferior turbinate hypertrophy, those are things where extremely common findings, and some, one person might say, oh yeah, that septum is deviated such that is probably what's causing your nasal congestion and we should fix that. And another person might say it's a little bit deviated, but we don't think that that's significant. How do you see on the payer side of it, them using this data? Like, do you anticipate that they would say in the future, let's say you want to do a septoplasty and a turbinate reduction, are they going to say, we're going to need you to submit your nasal endoscopy so we can be the judge of that as far as like if that is worthy of surgery?
Are you talking specifically about the visual data for like a nasal endoscopy, or would this be kind of more what an AI model kind of interprets from that data and then send?
Yeah, both. Like I would envision, what if like the insurance company had an AI that scans nasal endoscopies with their decision making as far as like what is considered significant as it relates to a deviated septum, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. I think they've got to kind of up their infrastructure a little bit. I still find myself faxing copies of like the CT scan to them. I don't know if you've ever seen a faxed CT sinus. There is no usable data there. I mean, maybe they may very. I'm sure if you'll save them $1, they'll do that. But I think at least right now, we don't have to worry about them while they're still using kind of the fax as the main mode that they get their data. I think it's more a risk that these AI models will churn out something that isn't fully in alignment with what the physician would agree with, and people just, I don't know if you've used an AI scribe, but sometimes that happens. You're like, oh no, that's really not what they said or meant by that. And I think that's just going to be a more likely situation that we're going to encounter. We just have to be careful and make sure that we sign off on things, which I hope is how the future holds it. Just we have this ENT physician verification with these tools.
Yeah, so that perhaps the AI helps with efficiency and maybe helps things move a little bit faster, but in the end, it's ENT physician verified rather than relying on AI and non-ENTs to kind of be making that decision.
Exactly. I think so. And I think if we show how that relationship between the physician and an AI model is done in a clinical encounter, either through the research or white papers or just advocacy, we will ensure that the way that the specialty and the future of medicine goes is, say that all these at-home business-to-consumer devices for looking in the ears and removing earwax, which terrifies me. But I think it's going to be, and I know there is already markets for the at-home check if your kid has an ear infection test. And I think that as long as we make sure that if the threshold isn't like 100%, the regulatory and liability burden forces these companies to put a prompt up saying, you need to go to an ENT to get this verified, right? We don't have enough security or enough confidence in the accuracy that we need to get this double checked by a professional. And I think that's the way it should go. But AI models are really sure of things. In general, they're like, no, this is it. I mean, right now, if you chat GPT, man, they are 100% sure the answer, it seems like, of everything all of the time. So we definitely need to have them to
humble it down a little bit.
Settle down, GPT-5.
What do you hear from colleagues as far as concerns and pushback on being excited about being a part of this new kind of wave of practice? What if I don't want to record every scope exam?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. We learn how to do things our way, and we recognize pretty early on in our careers that variability is not always great for outcomes. Like if you do things your way, then if something happens that's not expected, it's not because of a new technique that you've tried, right? So I think that in general, people become more conservative with trying new technology as they continue on with their careers. I would say, though, that opportunities like this, where there is such a shakeup in the landscape because of this advent of AI, that we have to think a little bit beyond ourselves and as ourselves as a specialty, and recognize that we do have an obligation to embrace this technology, to be able to dictate it and not be dictated by it. And so that takes a little bit of a little leap of faith. And I think you can't do that. You can't have a seat at the table saying you know how to implement AI and you've used these tools that are coming out that take the endoscopy feed from your camera system. If you're looking through the eyepiece of an endoscope and you just don't have that technology in your clinic, it's hard for you to really live and breathe that technological change if you're not at least using the precursor technology that allows it. It's like you don't know how to type on the keyboard and someone gives you your computer. You've got to at least start with that first part of it. And there is a benefit to starting with that. And it's something that I think would be beneficial for the specialty as a whole.
Yeah. I feel like when in residency, we would have opportunities where a lot of times we would be looking with a scope, with our eye. And then as I got out into practice, got used to recording things and playing it back and talking about it with the patient, I also felt like sometimes I would see things that I didn't see in the moment that when I was scoping them, because I was able to actually sit back and have, I flipped my brain from doing the procedure and avoiding bumping into things to actually looking at, okay, what are we seeing here? What's going on? And so, I don't know, I just feel like I'm a better physician when I'm recording it as opposed to when I'm looking at it in the moment.
Yeah,
personally.
I mean, it's totally true. I mean, you're turning something subjective into objective and allows you to turn it into a bit more of a science if you look over a second time, you support things that you didn't do. You also open the ability for other people to look at the same exam, and you have the ability to improve upon your ability to diagnose based on based on that in a way that you could never do for like an ephemeral moment where you just look through the scope and then jot it down, right? So, and the physical exam fundamentally hasn't changed in like 100 years, right? And this would be the first time that a technology can get introduced that does, maybe the stethoscope, but apart from that, this is the first time the technology is going to be introduced that really changes potentially how we approach it. And I think eventually it might be something that is liberalized to other specialties in a way that is beneficial for them. I mean, I can imagine pediatricians and rural pediatricians that don't have the benefit of an ENT around them could benefit greatly, or an MP or a physician assistant at some point having the ability to look in the ear. It's going to be a way for them to have a bit of diagnostic assistance. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's going to be a bad thing if the confidence of those models is so outsized that the needed referrals to a specialist go away.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully it would help unnecessary referrals, right? Because I think in a lot of places, getting into an ENT can take some time, especially if you're in a rural place that doesn't have a lot of access. And so the obvious thing that it can help with is potentially also noting things that are like maybe really serious, like obviously, if you see a tumor or you see something scary, it's like, okay, this needs an expedited referral. So maybe even just kind of with like helping triage, how worried are we about this patient? I could see that being helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it will stop the, oh my God, this patient has a polyp, and no, that's the turbinate.
If we could solve one thing, if we could just, decrease the turbinate referrals.
Yeah, I think we don't want a situation where a diagnosis that might be simple to make, but a treatment plan that could be quite varied, like with chronic sinusitis. We don't want to see that leave our specialty. I think that the diagnostic part might be available, for maybe a seasoned primary care physician, but I still think that's an appropriate referral. So there's a fine line, but yeah, I think there's definitely. And it was also going to help. I mean, like for the kids that are put on antibiotics for their ear infections, or the antibiotics in ear drops because their ear hurts and they have the Minute Clinic P isn't quite sure what's going on. So perhaps over treating in a protective way. I think that's going to be useful. Yeah, I do see that as a benefit.
I want to talk about the economics of it briefly, just thinking about like if I'm in private practice and I don't have a setup right now where I'm doing a recorded exam, and I'm thinking about, you mentioned at the top of the show, just the expense of outfitting clinics with this technology. How does the math, as far as thinking about, okay, how is this going to pay for itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely fair. And look, so as the CEO of Presidio, the feeling that I've had is that we, especially in private practice, have limited budgets, and budgets are getting tighter each time. And so we try and create products that are available at a reasonable price, that are high quality, that do everything that you need it to do for a physician, and nothing more. But it still comes with a price. And it is something that I was like, okay, so how do you justify for someone who's not using this on a regular basis? How can they justify the benefit of it economically? Because you can tell them, oh, like patients love to see it. You can record it and play it over. But, at the end of the day, the economics have to work. So we did a white paper, which is available on our website, where we looked at what happened before. It was a five physician group in Connecticut who put a system in each of their clinic rooms. And we said, what happened to the number of nasal endoscopies before and after? And we saw that the number went up pretty much across the board. Less so actually for the rhinologists, because they did it already pretty routinely. But it felt like this field of dreams principle, where you build it and it will come. Like if you have it available, it allows us to use the technology when we need it. I mean, we're kind of fundamentally, I don't know if I can speak for everyone, maybe it's just myself, but sometimes I can be a bit impatient, right? When we're in the OR, we ask for an instrument.
An impatient surgeon? What?
Yeah. Shocker. That's the most shocking development that is revealed today. But it's true. I mean, we'll send a nurse out for an instrument, and then we've just kind of figured out that we'll just use this other instrument in a unique way for it because we couldn't wait like 2 minutes for this. So there is, I think, the availability of this instrumentation means that we can use it more often. And that has a direct impact on our bottom line with the number of 31575 codes that we bill. So we found that it was within a matter of months that you recoup the costs, and these devices last for 80,000 hours. So more than enough to get your money's worth.
Okay. So as we round things out, what are your parting words for our ENT colleagues? You've kind of painted the picture. What do I do as one ENT? How do I embrace this and be a part of the change that we want to see?
Yeah. And I think exactly. I think there's a few things. One, I think that there is a very good incentive to document everything and capture the clinical data, capture it well with the protocols that you have kind of internalized.
Do you recommend having that as like a written document and then be very systematic about your scope each time so that you can match that up?
Or make sure just it's accurate in the procedure portion of your note, right? So make sure that if you're going to use a spray, it's or you can either keep it the same, do everything the same way each time, but if you're going to change it up, just make sure it's documented so it's accurate. And then I think it's going to be embracing any opportunity where you can join advocacy groups or work groups that are discussing implementation of AI, either at your local hospital or in your academic medical center. I think it's important to support the advocacy groups for the American Academy of Otolaryngology, ENT PAC, I think it's called, and the AAMT and the AMA. I think all of those things are really, really important. As much as you can, try and get a seat at the table, add to the literature. If you can, focus on how the implementation of AI is going to be affected. And if you can, even if you don't want to be the one writing articles or anything like that, see if there's anyone around you, if you're a private practice, anyone in the local academic medical center that needs sites to talk about or to trial out these different models and just be part of that environment. And I think that if we can, as a specialty, we'll become the specialty that is associated with this future technology the most, and that would give us a lot of leverage to make sure that we can push back against these kind of enemy at the gates, these different pressures that we have on us today.
Yeah. What's the saying about, you need to have a seat at the table or else you're on the menu or something like that?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah.
We want to control our own destiny.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, so I can't let you go without asking you about your AI assistant of choice. Are you, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude? What's the best one? What do we use?
I like totally vibe code. I've made a number of programs, and I use Claude Code and GPT-5 for coding, but I try them all out. There was one, honestly, the Chinese models are also really good, like Kimi K2, really choice. They're really direct. They're so stern. They won't give you like a paragraph answer. You'll ask them the question, they'll be like, no. No, period.
I appreciate that, actually. A really direct, succinct answer.
Exactly. It doesn't try and coddle
No need to sugarcoat it.
It's not sycophantic at all. It's amazing.
That's so cool. All right. Well, this has been really fun. Thank you for taking the time. For people who want to reach out to you and maybe geek out about this a little bit more, where's your what's your social of choice?
Yeah,
Are you LinkedIn?
You can find me LinkedIn, I think, probably is the one that is the easiest to find me on.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This was fun.
All right. Have a good day,
cool.
Kel.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _ENT BackTable ENT on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable ENT is hosted by Gopi Shah
and Ashley Agan.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Aaron Bowles,
Gabe D'Agrazio,
and Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Taylor Spurgeon Hess.
Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.